Back to the Unitarian Congregation Church of Men in Uxbridge. My name is Matthew Marion. I'm going to be starting off today with Chopin's Prelude in E minor.
Good morning and welcome as we gather in this historic place to be together, to seek together wisdom and knowledge as we seek to be one people. I invite us to begin this service with a reading by the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. As many of you may know, last Friday was the 57th anniversary of his famous I Have a Dream speech in Washington. So may we begin by hearing some of his words. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. There are some things in our social system to which all of us ought to be maladjusted. Hatred and bitterness can never cure the disease of fear. Only love can do that. We must evolve for all human conflict a method which rejects revenge, aggression, and retaliation. The foundation of such a method is love. Before it is too late, we must narrow the gaping chasm between our proclamations of peace and our lowly deeds which precipitate and perpetuate war. One day, we must come to see that peace is not merely a distant goal that we seek, but a means by which we arrive at that goal. We must pursue peaceful ends through peaceful means. We shall hew out of the mountain of despair a stone of hope. It is our custom as we gather to kindle a flame in our midst. A flame, the symbol of that which is whole and holy. A flame, the symbol of wisdom and of knowledge. And we kindle this flame in a chalice, a shared cup. For each week we gather, whether physically or virtually, to be together in our quest for that which makes our lives whole and holy, which works to make of this world the place that it can be. We gather together to be one people, gathered in love, gathered in hope, gathered in joy. I invite those of you who wish to join in our affirmation. Love is the spirit of this church and service its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love and to help one another. During a service in which we are all present, this is the time that we would set forth for anyone who wishes to come forward, lighting a candle, and if they wish, sharing a joy, a sorrow, a milestone. We cannot do that virtually, and so we ask those of you who wish to share a joy or a sorrow to please share it through the chat or by email, and later in the service we will light candles for those joys and those concerns and milestones that fill us today. August 28th, 1963, in Washington, D.C., Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. shared these words. It's been 60 years since he shared them. Nearly 2/3 of the time between the signing of the Emancipation Proclamation and that I Have a Dream speech. May we listen again. May we hear his words. May we see his wisdom. I am happy to join you today in what will go down in history as the greatest demonstration for freedom in the history of our nation. 50 years ago, a great American in whose symbolic shadow we stand today signed the Emancipation Proclamation. This momentous decree came as a great beacon light of hope to millions of Negro slaves who had been seared in the flames of withering injustice. It came as a joyous daybreak to end the long night of their captivity. But 100 years later, the Negro still is not free. 100 years later, the life of the Negro is still sadly crippled by the manacles of segregation and the chains of discrimination. 100 years later, the Negro lives on a lonely island of poverty in the midst of a vast ocean of material prosperity. 100 years later, the Negro is still languished in the corners of American society and finds himself in exile in his own land. And so we've come here today to dramatize the shameful condition. In a sense, we've come to our nation's capital to cash a check. When the architects of our republic wrote the magnificent words of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, they were signing a promissory note to which every American was to fall heir. This note was a promise that all men, yes, black men as well as white men, would be guaranteed the inalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It is obvious today that America has defaulted on this promissory note insofar as her citizens of color are concerned. Instead of honoring this sacred obligation, America has given the Negro people a bad check, a check which has come back marked insufficient funds. But we refuse to believe that the Bank of Justice is bankrupt. We refuse to believe that there are insufficient funds in the great vaults of opportunity of this nation. And so we've come to cash this check. A check that will give us upon demand the riches of freedom and the security of justice. We have also come to this hallowed spot to remind America of the fierce urgency of now. This is no time to engage in the luxury of cooling off or to take the tranquilizing drug of gradualism. Now is the time to make real the promises of democracy. Now is the time to rise from the dark and desolate valley of segregation to the sunlit path of racial justice. Now is the time to lift our nation from the quicksands of racial injustice to the solid rock of brotherhood. Now is the time to make justice a reality for all God's children. It would be fatal for the nation to overlook the urgency of the moment. This sweltering summer of the Negro's legitimate discontent will not pass until there is an invigorating autumn of freedom and equality. 1963 is not an end, but a beginning. And those who hope that the Negro needed to blow off steam and will now be content will have a rude awakening if the nation returns to business as usual. And there will be neither rest nor tranquility in America until the Negro is granted his citizenship rights. The whirlwinds of revolt will continue to shake the foundations of our nation until the bright day of justice emerges. But there is something I must say to my people who stand on the warm threshold which leads into the palace of justice. In the process of gaining our rightful place, we must not be guilty of wrongful deeds. Let us not seek to satisfy our thirst for freedom by drinking from the cup of bitterness and hatred. We must forever conduct our struggle on the high plane of dignity and discipline. We must not allow our creative process to degenerate into physical violence. Again and again, we must rise to the majestic heights of meeting physical force with soul force. The marvelous new militancy which has engulfed the Negro community must not lead us to distrust of all white people. For many of our white brothers, as evidenced by their presence here today, have come to realize that their destiny is tied up with our destiny. And they have come to realize that their freedom is inextricably bound to our freedom. We cannot walk alone. And as we walk, we must make the pledge that we shall always march ahead. We cannot turn back. There are those who are asking the devotees of civil rights, when will you be satisfied? We can never be satisfied as long as the Negro is the victim of the unspeakable horrors of police brutality. We can never be satisfied as long as our bodies, heavy with the fatigue of travel, cannot gain lodging in the motels of the highways and the hotels of the cities. We cannot be satisfied as long as the Negro's basic mobility is from a smaller ghetto to a larger one. We can never be satisfied as long as our children are stripped of their selfhood and robbed of their dignity by signs stating "for whites only." We cannot be satisfied as long as a Negro in Mississippi cannot vote, and a Negro in New York believes he has nothing for which to vote. No, we are not satisfied, and we will not be satisfied until justice rolls down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream. I am not unmindful that some of you have come here out of great trials and tribulations. Some of you have come fresh from narrow jail cells, and some of you have come from areas where your quest, the quest for freedom, left you battered by the storms of persecution and staggered by the winds of police brutality. You have been the veterans of creative suffering. Continue to work with the faith that unearned suffering is redemptive. Go back to Mississippi. Go back to Alabama. Go back to South Carolina. Go back to Georgia. Go back to Louisiana. Go back to the slums and ghettos of our northern cities, knowing that somehow this situation can and will be changed. Let us not wallow in the valley of despair. I say to you today, my friends, and so even though we face the difficulties of today and tomorrow, I still have a dream. It is a dream deeply rooted in the American dream. I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. I have a dream that one day on the red hills of Georgia, the sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will be able to sit down together at the table of brotherhood. I have a dream that one day even the state of Mississippi, a state sweltering with the heat of injustice, sweltering with the heat of oppression, will be transformed into an oasis of freedom and justice. I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today. I have a dream that one day down in Alabama, with its vicious racists, with its governor having his lips dripping with the words of interposition and nullification, one day right there in Alabama, little black boys and black girls will be able to join hands with little white boys and white girls as sisters and brothers. I have a dream today. I have dreamed that one day every valley shall be exalted and every hill and mountain shall be made low. The rough places will be made plain, and the crooked places will be made straight, and the glory of the Lord shall be revealed, and all flesh shall see it together. This is our hope, and this is the faith that I go back to the South with. With this faith, we will be able to hew out of the mountain of despair a stone of hope. With this faith, we will be able to transform the jangling discords of our nation into a beautiful symphony of brotherhood. With this faith, we will be able to work together, to pray together, to struggle together, to go to jail together, to stand up for freedom together, knowing that we will be free one day. And this will be the day. This will be the day when all God's children will be able to sing with new meaning. My country, 'tis of thee. Sweet land of liberty, of thee I sing. Land where my fathers died. Land of the pilgrim's pride. From every mountainside let freedom ring. And if America is to be a great nation, this must become true. And so let freedom ring from the prodigious hilltops of New Hampshire. Let freedom ring from the mighty mountains of New York. Let freedom ring from the heightening Alleghenies of Pennsylvania. Let freedom ring from the snow-capped Rockies of Colorado. Let freedom ring from the curvaceous slopes of California. but not only that. Let freedom ring from Stone Mountain of Georgia. Let freedom ring from Lookout Mountain of Tennessee. Let freedom ring from every hill and molehill of Mississippi. From every mountainside, let freedom ring. And when this happens, and when we allow freedom ring, when we let it ring from every village and every hamlet, from every state and every city, we will be able to speed up that day when all of God's children, black men and white men, Jews and Gentiles, Protestants and Catholics, will be able to join hands in the words of the old Negro spiritual. Free at last, thank God Almighty, we are free at last.
Thank you, Ralph. Next piece I'm going to be playing for you will be called The Girl with the Flaxen Hair by Claude Debussy. So Claude Debussy was a French composer born in 1862. He was actually one of the first impressionistic composers to come out of France during the time, considered a nationalistic composer. The reason why this is so important and why I try to bring some of his works to you guys today as well as last week is because he was a model for a time period of great change. A lot of these works were something to reflect on, to remind people what was coming. He actually unfortunately enough, he passed away several months prior to the end of the First World War. So a lot of great change was happening at the time. People listening to this music were also thinking about what's going on. And I'd like to try to share that with you guys today.
Let us pause for a moment, looking out at the beauty of this day. After many long, very hot days, we have a day that is somewhat more mild, a day when sun fills the sky, a day that looks to the future. May we hold the beauty of each day in our hearts. May we hold in our hearts and our minds the hopes for good things to come. may we hold in our hearts and minds those things which call us to make of this world a better place. My sermon today is entitled Happy Birthday. And as we begin today's service, I would like to take a moment to wish a happy birthday to someone. And I ask that each of you pause for just a moment to wish that child a happy birthday with me. I'm talking about a happy birthday to Jacob Blake's son. I believe it was the 8-year-old, but it may well have been the 5-year-old or the 3-year-old. I wish him a happy birthday, though I know it was not. I wish him a happy birthday, though I know he will never for the rest of his life have one. For I know that every year for the rest of his life, on that day, he will be again in the back seat of that car as his father, now sitting in a wheelchair, was shot 7 times in the back. Do you know what that would feel like? Thank God I don't know, and I hope that I and all of you listening will never know. The shooting by Officer Rustin Chesky took place within 3 minutes of the arrival of police in response to a call about a violation of a restraining order. Domestic violence calls are among the most dangerous for responding law enforcement people. But even so, it is their job. It is their duty to try to de-escalate. The shots were fired less than 3 minutes after the police arrived. I don't know how they could have figured out who people were and what was happening in 3 minutes. But it seems to me a very short time to try to de-escalate. Now it seems likely that Jacob Blake was not an angel, and it is even possible that he had a knife in his hand, though witnesses other than the police said that he did not. Still, it seems that there must have been some way of handling the situation other than the way in which it was handled. Could he not have been pulled from the car? How bad would it have been if he had gotten into the car and driven away? Oh, it would be nice to make an arrest on the spot, but an arrest later would not be so much worse. Why not let him drive away with his children? It seems impossible that 2 properly used tasers would not have brought him down. But even if they were faulty or improperly used, a single shot, perhaps to his arm, or pulling him back out of the car might have stopped him. But with 3 young children in the back of the car, 7 shots. 7 shots in his back. I wonder if someone had been sitting in the front seat of Officer Shesky's car with his children sitting in the back seat. Would he have been so quick to shoot 7 times? Any of those bullets could have ricocheted into the back seat, hitting, possibly killing one of the children. Jacob Blake Sr., recalling a conversation he had with his son the day after the shooting, said his son also does not know what prompted police to shoot. Why did they shoot me so many times? He reportedly asked his father. Again, quoting his father, I said, "Baby, they were not supposed to shoot you at all." Now, please do not forget those 3 children in the back seat whose lives have been forever changed. But let's look again at the situation. Purportedly someone, presumably Jacob Blake, had violated a restraining order. And one might say that the police were not unjustified in wishing to make an arrest. But let's take a moment to look at another happening. In that same town, and only a few days later, Kyle Rittenhouse, a 17-year-old carrying an assault rifle and claiming to be a militia member, came to town from Illinois to, quote, defend the residents of Kenosha. As he walked down the street, he argued and fought with some of the protesters who had gathered after the shooting of Jacob Blake. Rittenhouse then grabbed his rifle and killed Anthony Huber and Joseph Rosenbaum. He also shot and badly injured got the name wrong, a volunteer medic. He then dropped the rifle to his side, raised his hands, and walked down the street towards the police. It is at least reported that no one attempted to stop him, and that when he got to the police and the sheriff's deputy, they congratulated and high-fived him and gave him a bottle of water. They thought him a hero. Earlier in the day, apparently, a militia leader had offered to come to the protest to help, quote, keep the peace. The militia members were warmly thanked and invited to come and, open quote, help, close quote. Rittenhouse was later charged with murder. Some things can be corrected, you see. Too bad about Jacob. Still, in his 1963 speech, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. refers to police brutality twice. First is in a list of things that must be changed before we can be satisfied. The first and most important is, quote, we can never be satisfied as long as the Negro is the victim of the unspeakable horrors of police brutality. And the second is a listing of those who had were attending the rally. And referring to some of them, he says, and some of you have come from areas where your quest for freedom left you battered by the storms of persecution and staggered by the winds of police brutality. And it's been nearly 60 years. And there are so many names that I do not wish to know. Trayvon Martin, Breonna Taylor, Botham Jean, Tamir Rice, Eric Garner, George Floyd, and on and on and on and on. How many names do I have to know? How many names do I have to know and mourn the victims of brutality in this country, supposed to be a place of law and order? But I seem to have slipped, because it's not my intention to only criticize law enforcement, and it's not fair. There are police officers who should not be. People who do not recognize their duty to be responsible to all people. But most do. Most use their working time to encourage people with substance abuse or mental health issues to get treatment. They work with children, both in supporting volunteer sports programs and holidays and other programs to help people live more constructive life. They even use their free times to make their communities better places to live. It is probable that the percentage of bad police are no greater than the percentage of other people in other jobs, accountants or lawyers or teachers, or yes, ministers and priests. Just look at Jerry Falwell Jr. But too often the acts of a misguided few cast a dark shadow over the enormous number who should be honored. We should not be trying to punish the police because there are a few who abuse their power. Instead, we should be working to reward those who respect the law that they serve and who use their position to make our country a safer place, and all people treated with respect and dignity. But we do have a right to expect from all not to condone or conceal bad behavior of others. And so, if we don't want to be learning the names of more and more people mistreated by law enforcement, we better start by learning the names of the people in law enforcement who are doing the right thing. But it's going to be a big job, because you see, there are so many of them. When I think of some of the law enforcement people that I know, when I think of Carl, who was a deputy sheriff, who was criticized for not making more arrests, it seems that instead of arresting young people, he helped them make restitution and helped find them jobs and other ways to improve their lives. I've had police stop when I have been disabled on a highway and spend a considerable amount of time. Even when I had forgotten to re-register my car, a police officer stopped and spent almost 3/4 of an hour helping me to get my renewal online over my cell phone. Even the police officer that pulled me over because I was driving slowly and fast on a highway, and when he pulled me over, he said, "Oh, you're driving a Prius." And we both laughed, and I said I would drive more quickly. It's been 60 years since that speech. 2/3 of the time between the beginning of the Emancipation Proclamation and the speech that Martin Luther King gave. How long will it take? How long will it take that we realize that police and people of all nationalities, colors, deserve to be respected? How long will it be before every person in this country can say, "Free at last, free at last, thank God Almighty, we are free at last"? We're going to take a moment now to share candles of joy and concern. From Morella, a candle of joy for the time I will get to spend with my mother and the support of my friends that makes it possible. A candle of concern and hope for the Bouchard children headed back to school this week. A candle of appreciation for the power of duct tape. It can keep a banner of hope flying in front of our church. And thank God for that banner. It speaks very precious and very noble words. But that's not enough. Each of us, you and me, must speak those words with our voices and with our actions. Black lives and all lives matter. But at this time, we must take action to protect people, their dignity, their humanity in a time of trouble. And now, as we, I didn't light candles. Ooh. That's from the Bouchards, from Morella, and Peter. And now as we extinguish the flame that we kindle at our gathering, may it burn on in our hearts and in our minds. May it call us to be our best selves. May it be a time, a flame that calls us to be the people that we know we can and should be. Amen.
Thank you, Ralph. I'd like to end it off today with a great thanks to everyone who joined us today for the Unitarian Congregation Church at Menon and Uxbridge. I'm going to be closing off with All the Things You Are by Jerome Kern. Thank you.